Yo, yo, yo. What it do, Chicken Stew family? Is the Copper Color King. We back in this bad boy with some more good content. And today I'm going for the gusto. I'm going straight for the jugular tonight. We going straight for the jugular tonight. I'm going to go wild with this one. So many new discoveries that I've made over the last month. And what I could say, man, some of the information that we've been learning out the park. Out the park. Home run. Home run. Hole in one. Buzzer beater. Full yard dash. Scoring a punt. Make sure y'all like, comment, and subscribe, man. Click that notification bell to stay up to date on all content. And stay plugged in like an extension cord. If you've been following, we recently had to dive in a bit into the religion, the whole religion stuff, man. Just to understand where that stuff comes from. But we're going to take a step back away from that. And we're going to return to learning more about those who've dwelt in our country. Those who many of us descend from. We're going to learn about their trials and tribulations, the expedition of Hernando de Soto, and many of these other Spaniards who thought who thought, right, excuse me, our allergies is tripping out here right now, but who thought that they could step their way through the Americas as if it was like a piece of cake. See, they don't tell y'all. They don't tell us about how hard them boys fought down south just to retain their land. Just to hold on to the things that they loved. To what they held dearest to them. We're going to go into the book today, The Indian Races of North and South America. And in this part, and in this specific section of the book, we're going to talk about, and shout out all my folks from down south, man. Shout out them Florida boys, man. Them Florida water boys, man. Shout out them tribes. We gonna learn about the Florida Indians. I be tiptoeing all throughout the United States, bro. So we learn as we go. And what we learned about these Florida Indians, man, listen. I'm going to just give y'all a preview. Make sure y'all go follow the Instagram, Copper Color Cultures. We trying to build up the platform over there, man. So take your ass over to Instagram and follow so you can learn a little thing or two. But even when you search these things up on AI, ChatGPT, any other AI software, we learned that there wasn't only Chief Osceola. If you've been tuned in to my videos, we learned about Cal Tom. I'm going to re-drop that video. That's going to be a re-upload. Cal Tom, one of the many prominent Seminole leaders in the 1800s, a black man. You could search this up on ChatGPT. These whitewashed images, right? This is what the brother would have looked like. His ancestors today are now speaking up. They sued the Creek Nation just so that they could restore their citizenship, right? Just so that they could collect what belongs to them, right? These are ancestors of Cal Tom, Tuskegee Imathala, right? A real big dog rolling with the Muskogees. What I learned, it make me even look at the 5 civilized tribes different. And I know I've been having this perception about these 5 civilized tribes, but if you ask me, they were all invaders, right? Those aren't the original names of the folks who were originally here. right? Because then we got to ask the question, well, what the hell happened to the Muskogee? Why was the Muskogee, they say Muskogee or Creek, they was fighting each other though. Muskogees and Creeks was going to war with each other. So it just makes me question that whole Creek identity. Muskogee, remember, is the dialect, the language the people of the Southeast spoke. And that's not just Florida. We talking about the entire Southeast, from Louisiana up until small portions of North Carolina. You have folks speaking Muskogee. And then you have the introduction of these tribes like Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Cherokee. These the American pronunciations for them, by the way, because ain't no way in hell they was calling themselves that or pronouncing it like that. But it just makes me question that, because it says, like, even with King Payne, and this is another one we're going to speak on. Like I said, it wasn't only Chief Osceola. We had Cal Tom, King Payne, Queen Quee. We're going to call her Queen Quee because she was the queen of that land. Right? One of the many black queens in the Southeast. I tell you though, these people were described as having dark skin. Of course, they're going to add in the African conjecture. These people were described as having dark skin. King Payne, Chief Osceola, described as having dark skin, mixed of a Scottish, Irish ancestry. We all know where that comes from. Right? Dodge the hijack, like Cudi May will say on all that African stuff. Right? They're going to say they all of African descent. Why? Because their complexions were dark. Right? We talking about the Muskogees, right? Or Creek freedmen, quote unquote. Right? Because we know after these wars, what they was doing with these tribal peoples, right? Enslaving them and making them a part of their own tribe. Thus why they may identify as Creek today. But really, they Muskogee. What these freaking historians and researchers seem to not understand is that Creek and Muskogee, two different things. Muskogee is a language. It's a dialect. That's like calling Spanish people Españols. Right? Or if it was like that, then why not call just black and white people in America English instead of black and white? Since we all speak English, we are English people, not black and white. Thus, there's no color line, only a language barrier when it comes to dealing with other people, of course. There was a language that the people of the Southeast spoke. And because of conquest, a lot of these languages with other tribes, of course, intertwined, thus creating new languages. Hence why a lot of these people adopted Creek identities, right? This is all just a theory, right, for me, from what I've learned and from what I've researched. But they were all described as having dark complexions, right? There's no going back on that. There's no way they could go back on this stuff now, because AI even said it, right? The stuff that they're trusting our futures to is telling us what the complexion of these people was. But we're not going to learn about it there, right? We're going to learn about it as we read and as we go. I'm not going to continue to blabble, right? So we're going to jump straight into it. Chapter 1, the Florida Indians. And what are we going to learn? We learn that these are the early expeditions of Spanish adventurers Ponce de Leon, Velasquez de Leon, Panfilio de Narvaez, Hernando de Soto, and these different Spaniards who landed on the Southeast American mainland, Puerto Rico, and different places like that. If you've been following my videos, we actually did a video on Juan Ponce de Leon and what he had to do with Puerto Rico, right? His whole involvement with Puerto Rico. And we just going to run it back, right, real quick. I'm not sure if I did it live or if I did. Let me see. I think I did it in a regular video. But, right, yeah. He's the true colonizer of Puerto Rico. For those who don't know, not Christopher Columbus. It's Juan Ponce de Leon. But yeah, so we're going to talk about their expeditions through Florida, what they encountered, how things played out, the different stuff that they've discovered. It's very interesting, right? It's a very, very interesting story, especially to read about it. Because you could also kind of like, if you can, use imagery to place yourself in these scenarios. Just to get a glimpse of what was happening. So let's move forward. So what we got? Few portions of the Western continent have witnessed such scenes of barbarous warfare between the natives and European adventurers, or between subjects of contending nations at the east, as the long, low peninsula which lies at the southern extremity of the Atlantic Sea coast of the United States. Its whole history is strangely romantic and might well tempt us away from our subject, were there room to chronicle all of the interesting details of its discovery, conquest, and settlement. Right, the Western continent, very interesting, very romantic, right next to the Atlantic Ocean, right, probably clicks away from where Atlantis would have been. America is Atlantis? Who knows, right? But listen to this, though. The first picture presented to our minds when we turn back to these early times is of Juan Ponce de Leon, and we covered this, governor of Puerto Rico, led by Indian fables in 1512 to search amid the lowlands of the coast for a fountain that should bestow perpetual youth, landing upon the green and flowery shores and bestowing upon the country its pleasing and musical appellation. Right, they was talking about the Bahamas. So if you guys know, when we learned about Juan Ponce de Leon expedition through these islands, they came up when they got to the Bahamas. When they got there, the scenery alone took them away. It's almost like, they've never seen anything like this before. How you come to the quote unquote new world, stumble upon some stuff that's like, I ain't never seen this before. Well, does that make it new because you never seen it before? I mean, it been here all this time, goddamn it, right? You just now discovering it. We telling you where it's at, right? Quote unquote found the youth. We telling you where to find it. We telling you where to find this beautiful island. Long story short, though, let's continue. All of North America to the northward and eastward of Mexico went by the name of Florida. This is what I'm saying. We got to understand all of these people there, they spoke Muskogee. So y'all be tripping because y'all be almost seeing where I live at and shit like that. But they talking about literally from here, right, all the way over here, Florida. We had Mayans in Florida, y'all. That's how ancient Florida is, though. Mounds and all of that, but we're going to talk about that much later. Right? Failing in his first search, Leon undertook a second expedition into the unknown world in hopes of finding mines with precious metals, gold. But he was killed in a fight with the natives. The perfidious Luke Velasquez de Leon, another Spaniard, in 1518 visited the coast to the northward of Florida to procure gold and slaves. Right, these different folks kept hearing about these stories about it being massive quantities of gold here in America. Not only that, when we read the Mound Builders book, and if you follow my videos again, that's all they digging up in the mounds. Gold, copper, silver, jade, mad different stuff. So there was definitely huge quantities of gold here. Hence why there was a California gold rush to begin with. Right, the Asians knew that it was gold over here. They knew that for hundreds of years now. but we're not going to get sidetracked. The colony natives whom he tempted on board were shut under hatchets and conveyed to Cuba. Right? The kindly natives who he tempted on board were shut in hatchets and conveyed to Cuba. America's first slaves. Them pictures where you got all them Africans trapped under the ships and whatnot. This what they talking about. And they telling us who they put under the ships right there. The natives. The natives. And sent them off to Cuba, where the Maroons were, right? Returning again to the country, he and his party were justly punished for their treachery, nearly all of them being slain by the inhabitants, right? See, I told y'all, going nuts, who mindful of former injuries rose upon them unawares after putting them off their guard by demonstrations of friendship. They offed Luke Velasquez de Elion, offed them, get out of here. Send another one. Send another one. And this was happening for a while, y'all. So, yeah. Those who had been carried into servitude mostly perished, some by voluntary starvation, right? These Spaniards were killing themselves. Others by grief and despair. They weren't being tortured by the Indians. That whole idea of there being an Indian slavery is conjecture. Throw it out the window, because they didn't have no type of slavery, like slave labor and beating you and whipping you. They ain't do that. Their slavery was completely different, right? Their forms of slavery were like adopting you into the family now. You got to be one of us, right? That's what it was. And these Spaniards, they was killing themselves, right? Unlike being under Spanish control or being a Spanish slave and being forced to work and being put to death or tortured and being murdered brutally, right? And we're going to see that, right? The Indians of Florida are represented by all historians as high-spirited, right? High-spirited and a courageous race, showing considerable skill in agriculture, the growing of corn and many other crops, and exhibiting marks of far greater civilization than those of the North. Bang, right there. Highly civilized, up in the air with it. Let's do it. It seems not improbable, judging from their traditions, appearance, and customs, that they, as well as the Natchez, had immigrated from Mexico. Not only did the Natchez immigrate from Mexico, but didn't they say the Choctaw and Chickasaw migrate from Mexico too? Whoa. Run it back. So what's this Siberian land bridge stuff they talking about? Right? That's because that ain't these people. These Florida Indians are not the same people. They came from Mexico. Who else was fleeing from Mexico? And why? Right? The invading tribes, the Nahuatls, the Mexicas, these Aztecs. They was kicking ass in Mexico and taking names and restructuring everything, forcing a lot of these folks to leave. Hence why it was so much intertribal warfare out here, because they was encountering other peoples who were also making their way downtown, walking fast, faces passing their home now. You got all these black Indians coming up here, meeting up with the Chinese looking ones. Right? It's going to be a divide. Right? It's going to be a serious divide. Because there's already a connection between those who were dwelling in Mexico and America. An ancient, long begotten, forgotten connection. Hence the mound builders and so forth and so forth. That's a whole nother story. But yeah. It seems not improbable, judging from their traditions, right, immigrated from Mexico, perhaps at no very remote period. They resided in towns and villages of considerable extent and showed a degree of resolution and desperate valor in defending their homes against the murderous Spaniards, which has seldom been equaled. Unappalled by the terrible execution of the unknown weapons of their enemies, who mounted upon horses hitherto unknown in the country, so they say, and clad in defensive armor, presented a novel and unaccountable spectacle to their wondering eyes. They disputed the invaded territory inch by inch. And like most of their red-skinned brethren, they can no longer brook the indignity of slavery. Right? This takes us back to the tribes constantly being put under slavery. Some form of slavery. They left Mexico because the Aztecs was enslaving them. These are the 1500s. Right? Who's in Mexico during the 1500s? The Aztecs. They just said they left Mexico. Right? This is right after Columbus stepped foot. So things ain't even start going down over there yet. Make the connection. Right? They couldn't be under the indignity of slavery. The proud spirit of the Indian can never, like that of the African, be so humble that his race can continue and multiply in servitude. Huh? What is you saying? What happened with the black folks while we was in slavery? I don't want to hear it, man. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it no more. This is what it is, man. They can never like that be the proud spirit of the Indian. Can never. Like, take a look at that, man. Read it and weep. Like, I'm trying to tell y'all, bro. I'm trying to tell y'all. This is why I wanted to go into this book in the Indian civil races of the North and South America. Because they giving us true drop. This is real drop. Right? They couldn't stand slavery. It was constant rebellion. Right? Constant rebellion. They can never, like that of the African, be so humbled that his race can continue and multiply in servitude. So I always ask people today, like, yo, would you let somebody enslave you now? Like, not only knowing what we know, but would you really let somebody run up and like really partake and move like that? Gotta give people like Nat Turner they props. Anybody who fought back or fought against it at that time, it was embedded in their DNA. Right? That's what they telling us. They gangster in A. Right? The old Portuguese narrator of De Soto's conquest, speaking of the Indian slaves of Cuba, says that their custom was to hang themselves to escape the toil and degradation of work in the mines. Right? The tribes, them, in Cuba, when they was working the mines, the Indian slaves, they would hang themselves. They would kill themselves because it's like, yo, I can't do this. Right? He tells of an overseer in the service of Vasco Porcalo, afterwards De Soto's lieutenant general, Vasco Porcalo, De Soto's general, who, knowing the Indians under his charge had resolved to hang themselves, went instead for them at the place where they intended to put this dismissal resolution into execution. With the rope in his hand, he told them they must not imagine that any of their designs were hid from him, and that he would come hang himself with them. Check this out. That he might torment them in the afterlife 100 times more than he had done in this life. His expedient had the desired effect upon the superstitious and credulous minds, and giving up their purpose, they returned submissively to their task, right? Willie Lynch theory. This Spaniard said to the tribes them, he said out his mouth, yo, y'all trying to hang yourself? I bet. I'm going to do it too. And when we get to the same place, when we both get to the afterlife, I'm going to enslave you worse than I did when we was alive. That is the most savagest thing I've ever read in any of these books. That is insane, right? American slavery, right? The first slaves in America were Indians. And this is the stuff that the plantation or overseers, the workers, was telling them. I'm going to kill you in the afterlife. That's insane. That's insane. I'm going to kill you in the afterlife. Right? They're going to make mention of Panfilio de Narvaez now. In April 1528, with the commission from Charles V, right? Charles V, right? The swarthy conqueror of the Inca, to conquer and take possession, landed 400 men and 40 or 50 horses at East Florida. Penetrating the wilderness, they crossed the country to the Appalachia, sometimes experiencing kind treatment from the Indians, at other times in danger from their attacks. Finding no gold but little provision at this town, from which they drove out their inhabitants on their first arrival, the Spaniards shaped their course to the south towards Ayut. Tormented by hunger, beset by hidden foes, disheartened by terrible difficulties, which beset their path from the almost impassable natural conformation of the country, and worn out by incessant exertion, Narvaez and his men reached Ayut only to find it burned and deserted by its inhabitants. That's what they did. They burned down they'll burn down the land and dip. They'll burn everything, dip, take everything with them and dip, right? Because it's better that they don't have it and they escape with their lives than the Spaniards kill them and take over whatever they got, right? These people were also smart, right? Fight fire with fire. Sometimes you can't win every war with your hands. You got to use strategy. And this is why they use the land and the environment around them to survive. They don't talk about this stuff in the story, in the history books and stuff. It's straight up murder and kill on behalf of the Spaniards, right? Or behalf of Columbus and the New World founders, or whatever the case may be. But they don't talk about how when these Spaniards came over here, they were getting bodied left and right? Outsmarted, right? From people who were, quote unquote, walking around with half clothed and playing with bows and arrows, right? Technically saying that they're under civilized. But let's continue. Many of the party having already perished, the rest hopeless of making further progress by land, set to work to construct boats in which they might reach a port of safety. With singular ingenuity, they prepared tools from the iron of their account treatments, and with no further materials than were furnished by the productions of the forest and the manes, tails, and skins of their horses, 5 small boats were built. They embarked and sailed, but nearly all perished either by famine or by the dangers of the sea. Only a handful of the number were ever heard from, among who was Alvaro Nunez Cabeza de Vaca. Right? And it's so funny because this means Cabeza de Vaca, it means cowhead. And not only do they have this name that still exists, but they have a statue of this mother lover. There's a statue of him, of Cowhead. There's a whole statue of him. And that's crazy. But he's known as the lone survivor of folks who thought they could build boats out of horse hairs, right? And they call the Indians stupid. Yo, it be killing me, bro. It be killing me. They built boats out of horse hairs and really sailed out into the waters thinking that they would really make it and survive. But, you know, you gotta let people be who they gonna be, man, right? But he actually traveled a long trip too. It's so funny because, yeah, see, look, he traveled a long route, a super duper long route. And surprisingly, he made it happen, right? He made it happen. But yeah, with only 4 companions, he kept on his course to the west. And after years of peril, hardship, and servitude, reached the Spanish settlements of Mexico, right? They had some working. They had him working. Right, he had to find his way back home. Right, the tribes them had him enslaved, quote unquote, enslaved, quote unquote, not the other way around. Right, really putting on. Right, I say that proud. Right, the next Spanish expedition to Florida was of far more importance and interest than either had preceded it. The celebrated Hernando de Soto, after acquiring an immense fortune as a companion of Pizarro at Peru, right, dealing with them Incas, was moved by the restless spirit of adventure to undertake a more complete examination of the new world open to Spanish cupidity and curiosity. With 7 ships of his own provided and accompanied by from 600 to 1,000 warlike and energetic adventurers, many of whom were of noble rank, De Soto set sail in the month of April 1538, right? De Soto set sail to Florida, or to the Americas, in 1538. This is 40 to 50 something years after Columbus set sail on the islands, right? So there weren't even serious Spanish settlements established there as of yet, right? Some, but not many. Some, again, but not many, because they wasn't out there 1412 when the Aztecs was out there, or the Incas was out there, or the Nahuatl, Olmecs, and all of them. Well, the Olmecs came a little bit before, but all these people was out there. There weren't no Spanish settlements, so there had to have been a lot of migration happening already in the Americas due to the people who were invading. Man, y'all could feel free to chime in, man. We live on TikTok. Chime in. Let's talk about it. Upwards of a year was spent mostly upon the island of Cuba before the fleet set sail for the Florida coast. In the latter part of May 1539, the vessels came to anchor off the Bay of Espiritu Santo, now Tampa Bay. Right? It used to be called Espiritu Santo by the Spanish. On the western seaboard, in a large division of soldiers, both horse and foot, were landed. The Indians had taken the alarm, and although the smoke of their fires had been seen from the shipboard in various directions, all had fled from the district or lay concealed in the thickets. De Soto appears to have been desirous to proceed upon peaceable terms with the natives, but hostiles soon followed. Some skirmishes took place near the point of landing, and the Spaniards speedily possessed themselves of the nearest village, where were the headquarters of the cacique Usita or Hiragra. Right now, I'm gonna blow your mind real quick, right? Let's just keep all of these different chiefs and caciques and queens and kings and whatever they about to mention. Keep their names placed in the back of your head, because I want y'all to understand what these people looked like from his point of view, from his eyes, right? We're gonna read a description of these people. We're gonna run it back. We're gonna run this shit like a year back, 50 videos back, like real quick. Check it. Here, De Soto established himself in the Lord's house, which was built upon a mound by the seashore. De Soto built the Lord's house on a mound by the seashore. Why was this? Wasn't these mounds held as sacred grounds? He built a church, or his place, his palace, where he dwells, on top of a mound by the seashore. Mind y'all, Florida's coast was way more expanded back in these times. These things is under the water. Right? Scuba divers. Get your scuba gear and go check it out. Right? TikTok scuba divers. Go check it out. Let's see what we can find. Right? But yeah. While the soldiers used materials of other buildings in constructing barracks, at the inland extremity of the town stood the temple devoted by the Indians to a religious observance. Over the entrance of this building was the wooden figure of a fowl, right? Or a fowl, a bird, having the eyes gilded, placed there for the purpose of ornament or as symbolic of the tutelary deity of the palace, right? Again, remember when we rewind back to this religion stuff, not gods, not things to be worshipped exactly, but symbols of the deity. What does tutelary mean? How do these people connect back to them first peoples, man? Protector, guardian, or patron. Right? Their deity. Clearings were now made around the village to give free scope to the operations of the cavalry, and parties were sent out to explore the country and to make prisoners who should serve as guides or hostages. The remembrance of horrible outrages committed upon himself and his people by Narvaez had so embittered the old chief Hiragra against the whites that no professions of friendship and goodwill could appease his hatred. My son was like, nah, get him out of here. I do not like these Spaniards. Like, get them gone. Right? And let's not forget, not all of them was white. Right, not all of them was white, right? Black on black makes things even more blacker, right? That's why a lot of people even black the way they is now down there. Mix that black on black, right? And you get more black, right? Blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice. That black been there for hundreds of years, since the 1500s. Hey, amen, since before that, right? But yeah, that no professions of friendship or goodwill could appease his hatred. He wanted to get up with De Soto. De Soto released prisoners who were taken by his scouting parties, charging them with presents and conciliatory messages for their chief, but all in vain. He was trying to trick them. In the tangled forests and marshes, the Indians were found to be no contemptible opponents. They were described as being so dexterous, fierce, and nimble that foot can gain no advantage upon them. So dexterous, fierce, and nimble that foot can gain no advantage. Their bows and arrows were so effective that coats of mail did not prove a sufficient protection against their force. Right? That coated mail, that iron covering that they was waltzing up in there with, them bows was going straight through them bad boys. Flying straight through. Heart shots, chest shots. Right, don't get caught slipping. They're going to tear you up with them bows and arrows. The arrows were headed, as usual, with stone or with fish bone. Those which were made of canes or reeds produced the deadliest effect. Made of canes or reeds produced the deadliest effect. Right? A party under Gallegos, scouring the country a few miles from the camp, attacked a small body of Indians and put them to flight. But as a horseman was charging his lance at one of the number, he was amazed to hear him cry out, "Sirs, I am a Christian. Do not kill me, nor these poor men who have given me my life. They found one of them amongst the tribes them." Right? It was one of them who got lost years ago and just so happened to be wandering around with the Indians, fighting for them and fighting by their side. And who obviously had grown a liking to them for sparing his life. But as I said, they became like family. There was no such thing as Indian slavery. Right? There was no such thing as them enslaving people. Right? They didn't do that. Right? Naked, sunburned, and painted, this man was scarce distinguishable from his wild associates. His name was John Ortiz, and he had lived with the Indians 12 years, being one of the few followers of Narvaez who escaped destruction. Since the disastrous failure of that expedition, he had made his way to Cuba in a small boat and had returned again to Florida in a small vessel sent in quest of the lost party. So he has been there since about 1520. Right, he was there for 12 years prior to De Soto popping out. And he was mixed in with the Indians. And this is where you get that term Spanish Indians. That's where it comes from. Because you have a lot of Spaniards or Spanish people at that time who were having babies and mixing in with the tribes them. Right, Spanish would have been a lot of people's first language. A lot of us. Word. True story. Because of stuff like this. Right? But yeah, so since the disastrous failure of that expedition, he had made his way to Cuba in a small boat and had returned again to Florida in a small vessel sent in quest of the lost party. The Indians enticed a few of the crew on shore and made them prisoners. Ortiz was among the number, and he was the only one who escaped the immediate death, the only one from the Narvaez expedition. Remember, he got murked off. Right, the tribes done murked him off. Right. After amusing themselves by various expedients to terrify and torment their captive, the savages, by the command of their chief Heragra, bound him to 4 stakes and kindled a fire beneath him. He was preserved even in this extremity by the compassionate entreaties and persuasions of a daughter of the cacique, right? She was jacking him. She was like, oh, all right, let's save this man. I kind of like him. Right, and this is where it starts. Right, this is where it starts. Believe it or not, and most people won't understand this, right? But then again, it's kind of easy to understand, but it's also confusing because if you do have some type of mixed race, right? If for those who may have full-blooded or don't have full-blooded, if you got some type of mixed race ancestry, the Indian is most likely going to come from the woman, from your mom, right? It could come from your dad, but if it comes from your dad, then it comes from his mom. Right, but then from his mom, it could come from the dad. And then from that dad, the mom, da-da-da. Long story short, is always going to be the maternal line. And the paternal line will always be the one that you may find with the European or, a high mixture of that, a high admixture, or whatever the case may be. And it's because of stuff like this. The men get with the woman, they make babies, and now they have a bunch of Spanish, Indian, mixed breed kids running around the spot. Right? I know that's what it's like for me. Right? When I look at my moms and pops and I really start connecting all of the files and stuff that I got, it makes sense. Right? My mom got it fresh, like it's fresh. She might even just be full-blooded, to be honest. Right? But my pops, though, different story. Right? He got the half, and you can see it. Right, it's in plain sight. And that's the part that'll go over a lot of people's heads. Just really look at your family them and really assess the situation for what it is. Right, the woman was jacking the men, and this is how they ended up sparing John Ortiz. Right, his burns having been healed, he was deputed to keep watch over the temple where the dead bodies were deposited to defend them from the attacks of wolves. Right, he was instructed to be a keeper of the dead. His vigilance and resolution in dispatching a wolf, panther, or a lion, which had seized the body of a child of one of the principal chiefs, aroused a kindly feeling towards him, and he was well used for 3 years. At the end of that time, for 3 years. At the end of that time, Heragra had been worsted in a fight with Moscoso, a hostile chief whose dwelling was at a distance of 2 days' journey. Thought it necessary or expedient to make a sacrifice of his Christian subject to the devil. Seeing, says our Portuguese historian, the devil holds these people in a deplorable bondage. They are accustomed to offer to him the life and blood even of their subjects, or of anybody else that falls into their hands. Conjecture. That's not true. Forewarned of this danger by his former benefactors, Ortiz fled in the night towards of the country of Moscoso. Upon first meeting with the subjects of this chief, he was in great danger from the want of an interpreter to explain whence he came, what was his errand, but at last, finding an Indian who understood the language of the people with whom he had lived, he quieted the suspicions of his hosts and remained with them in friendship no less than 9 years. Moscoso, hearing the arrival of De Soto, generously furnished his captive with an escort and gave him free permission to return to his countrymen, in accordance with the promise made when Ortiz first came to his territory. The long-lost Spaniard was joyfully received with his companions at De Soto's camp, his services as guide being considered invaluable. In answer to the first inquiry, however, where gold was to be sought, he could give no satisfactory information. The cacique Moscoso, being sent for, soon presented himself at the Spanish encampment, and after spending some days in familiar intercourse with the wonderful strangers, departed, exulting in the possession of a shirt and other tokens of royal manifest. Right? Moscoso had beef with Heragra. Heragra was the one trying to protect the land, so it raises the question on who this Moscoso person was, but they don't give enough details on that situation. So we're going to go into chapter 2. Right, this is a very interesting chapter because here we're going to learn about the Queen of California, the Queen of Florida. Right, let's check it out. So as the progress northward through Florida, contest with the natives, Vitachuco and the expedition to Cutifachicui, a departure further west, right before they went westward. De Soto now concluded to send his vessels back to Cuba and leaving a strong guard in Hidalgo's country to proceed northward. Favorable accounts were brought by his emissaries from the adjoining district of Paracoxi, right, all of these places being in Florida, and deluded in hopes of procuring gold, invited to still more distant exploration in Calais, right? Vasco Porcalho, right, his lieutenant, wearied and disgusted with hopeless and desultory skirmishing among the swamps and morasses, resigned his commission and left with the squadron, right? Northwest Florida, Alcucha, right? Alchua, right? That's where all of these places are kind of located, right? Alchua, Calais, what else? And Paracoxi. That's right, Northwest Florida, right? The inhabitants of the town, which was large and gave tokens of thrift and abundance, had fled into the woods, except a few stragglers who were taken prisoners, right? Slaves. The troops fell upon the stored provisions and ravaged the fields of maize, and with the eagerness of famished men. Leaving Calais on the 11th of August, De Soto pressed forward to the populous town of Ochile, right? Ochile is the Florida Panhandle, right? That's where that is at. Here, without pretense of coming as friends, the soldiers fell upon the inhabitants and overpowered them by the suddenness of their attack. The country was under the rule of 3 brothers, whom once was taken prisoner in the town. The second brother came in afterward upon the receipt of friendly messages from the Spanish general, but the elder Vitachuco gave the sternest and most haughty responses to all embassies proposing conciliatory measures. Apparent at last to be convinced by the persuasion of his 2 brothers who were sent to him, he contested to a meeting. With a large company of chosen warriors, he proceeded to De Soto's encampment, and with due formality, entered into a league of friendship. Both armies took themselves to the principal village of Vitacucho, and royal entertainment was prepared, right? Vitacucho was trying to backdoor De Soto, right? Soften them up. The same thing that De Soto was doing to the tribes, Vitacucho was on the same type of time, right? Trying to soften them up, right? So check this. Look at what your boy did. It's very interesting, right? The treacherous cacique, notwithstanding these demonstrations, gathered an immense force of his subjects around the town, with the surprising and annihilating the Spaniards, right? But John Ortiz, the same dude who was spared by these tribes, right, averted the catastrophe. He turned his back. He bit the hand that fed him. That man bit the hand that fed him because Vitacucho was about to backdoor De Soto. All crazy, right? De Soto ain't even see it coming. If it wasn't for John Ortiz, De Soto would have been a dead man long before his encounter with Chief Tuscaloosa. Right? Yeah, he got up with Chief Tuscaloosa too, in Louisiana, in Alabama. De Soto was all over the place, right? And this is why his expeditions is so interesting, because he encountered all of the black chiefs, all of the big dogs, all of the colored people, right? And we're going to talk about it, right? Preparations were at once made to anticipate the attack, and so successfully were they carried out. The principal cacique was secured and his army routed, right? They got up with Vitacucho and they murked off the army. Many of the fugitives were driven into a lake where they concealed themselves by covering their heads with the leaves of the water lilies. The lake was surrounded by the Spanish troops, but such was the resolution of the Indians that they remained the whole night immersed in water, and on the following day, when the rest had delivered themselves up, being constrained by the sharpness of the cold that they endured in the water, 12 still held out, resolving to die rather than surrender. Chilled and stupefied by the exposure, those were dragged ashore by some of the Indians of Paracoxy, belonging to De Soto's party, who swam after them and seized them by the hair, right? Captured by other tribes. Why was this? Well, we know what was De Soto and them doing, right? Making people fight against each other, right? And then you had other people, like I said, who were openly being friendly, right? Not knowing that they was about to get backdoored. And De Soto and the Spaniards, they played that card against the other tribes, because what it did was they used each other to wipe them. They used one another to wipe each other out, and they could remain decent on the land, right? Although a prisoner, with his chief warriors reduced to the condition of servants, right? Servitude, Viracocha did not lay aside his daring purpose of revenge. He managed to circulate the order among his men that on a day appointed while the Spaniards were at dinner, every Indian should attack one nearest him with whatever weapon came to hand. Viracocha was on that, like ready, like let's do this. I'm trying to get up with De Soto, man. He can't stay much longer, right? When the time arrived, Viracocha, who was seated at the general's table, rallying himself for a desperate effort, sprang upon his host and endeavored to strangle him. This blade, says the Portuguese narrator, fell upon the general, but before he could get his two hands to his throat, he gave him such a fierce blow with his fist upon the face that he put him all in a gore of blood. De Soto had doubtless perished by the unarmed hands of the muscular and determined chief, had not his attendants rushed to his rescue and dispatched the assailant. Right? Listen to how they describe Viracocha. Right? The unarmed hands and muscular determined chief. Muscular, like on that. Like burly, like let's do it. De Soto would have died had his people not got up with him. Right? He would have died right then and there in Florida. Right? His resting place would have been Florida. He would have been put on a t-shirt in Florida. He would have been a pack. Right? He would have been a pack. Right? All of the other prisoners followed their cacique's example, catching at the Spaniards' arms or at the pounder where they pounded the maize. Each set upon his master therewith, or on the first that fell into his hands. They made use of the lances or swords they met with, as skillfully as they had been bred to do it from their childhood. Right? They've been taught from childhood how to weigh that stick, how to tote that. From childhood, they was taught. Right? These ain't no dummies. Right? Their parents taught them how to fight. Their parents taught them how to defend themselves. This is why they having such a hard time. Right? Paracoxy is Central Florida. Right? So that one of them with sword in hand made head against 15 or 20 men in the open place, until he was killed by the governor's halberdiers. Another desperate warrior with only a lance kept possession of the room where the Indian corn was stored, and could not be dislodged. He could not budge. They could not move this young man. Right? He was shot through an aperture in a roof. They had to get up with him through a light fixture, aperture in the roof, because he was holding it down with just him and a lance. Just him. Spaniards coming is like hiding, camping in one room of Call of Duty, and every time somebody turn the corner, you knock them off, and just 100 dead bodies in front of you. That's the type of time he was on, right? But they murked them, right? The Indians were at last overpowered, and all who had not perished in their struggle were bound to stakes and put to death. The executioners were the Indians of Paracoxy, who shot them with arrows, right? Using folks against each other. Right? Napecta, the scene of this event, was left by the Spaniards in the latter part of September, forcing their way through the vast swamps and over the deep and merry streams that intercept their path and exposed to the attacks of revengeful proprietors of the soil. They came to the town of Uzachil, somewhere near the present Osceola River, midway between the Swanee and Appalachia, right, the Florida Panhandle again. Encumbered with horses, baggage, and armor as they were, their progress is surprising. Uzachil was diverted by the Indians, and the troops reveled in store of provision left by the unfortunate inhabitants. Marauding parties of the Spaniards succeeded in seizing many prisoners, both men and women, who were chained by the neck and loaded with baggage. When the army recommenced their march, the poor creatures resorted to every method to effect their escape, some filing their chains in two with flints, and others running away when the opportunity offered, with the badge of slavery still attached to their necks. Those who failed in their attempt were cruelly punished. They were enslaving Indians in the Americas first. These slave stories waving in the waters, all of this stuff, it all comes back from what was already happening here in the 1500s. All right, so remember when I said keep in mind all of these chiefs that come from Florida. Remember what I said, keep it in mind. Who was De Soto enslaving? Right. So we're going to go into the book, The History of Hernando de Soto in Florida, or the record of events of 50 or 60 years from 1512 to 1568. And in this book, De Soto's words, he states, and here we about to learn about the complexions of these people. I've covered this before. He states that these people of South Carolina or Florida go entirely naked except that of the loins. They wear skins of small animals like martins fastened by a girdle of plaited grass to which they tie around the body like tails of other animals. The complexion of these people is black, not that much different from that of the Ethiopians. Their hair is black and thick and not very long, and it is worn tied upon the head in the form of a little ponytail. In person, they have a good proportions, middle stature, and a little above our own, broad across the breast, broad chest, strong in the arms, and well formed in the legs and other parts of the body. Shannon Sharp. The only exception to their good looks is they have broad faces. Broad faces. De Soto. Yo, my dogs. You said we was black. You said the Indians in South Carolina and Florida and then Alabama, Louisiana, you said they were black. Chief Tuscaloosa's name is Black Warrior. So these people you was enslaving, they're black. These is other black people. When you get down to the nitty gritty, these is other black people in the Americas. Chains on their necks, being shackled together, put in the chain gang. Hold up. Who said slavery? What? Slavery started with the what? British Africans? What? 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 Man, that's why you got to connect with the roots. But anyway, let's continue. It's going to be a good one. It's about to get even better, y'all. So just stay in tune. It's about to get even better, y'all, right? Let's continue. The natives of this northwestern portion of Florida evince no little skill and good management in the construction of their dwellings and in the method of agriculture. Their houses were pronounced almost like farmhouses of Spain. And some of the towns were quite populous. They built farmhouses like the houses in Spain. And they were populated by a lot of people, which means they had a society functioning and running and rolling and rocking. Right, let's continue. Making a halt at Anayaka, the capital town of the district of Palachi, right, Tallahassee, the Soto sent a party to view the seacoast. The men commissioned for this service discovered tokens of the ill-fated expeditions of Navarrete at Ayut, where the 5 boats were built. These were a manger of hewn from the trunk of a tree, and bones of the horses who had been killed to supply the means of outfit. De Soto, about the last of November, sent a detachment back to the Bay of Esperanto Santo, Tampa Bay, with directions for 2 caravels to repair to Cuba, and the other vessels, which had not already been ordered home, to come round by sea and join him at Palachi. 20 Indian women were sent as a present to the general's wife, Donna Isabel, and what she did with these women, enslaved them. Don't get me started, Miss Isabel. Right, in one of the scouting expeditions during the stay at Palachi, a remarkable instance of self-devotion was seen in 2 Indians, whom the troops came upon as if they were gathering beans, with a woman, the wife of one of them, in their company. Though they might have saved themselves, yet they chose rather to die than to abandon the woman. They wounded 3 horses, whereof one died, before the Spaniards succeeded in destroying them. Early in March 1540, now time is going on, the Spanish forces were put in motion for an expedition to Upaha, right? Upaha is Live Oak, Florida. Far to the northeast, gold was still the object of search. A young Indian who was made prisoner at Napaecta, also in Live Oak, alleged that he had come from the country and that it was of great extent and richness. He said that it was subject to a female cacique and that the neighboring tribes paid her tribute in gold, whereupon he described the manner how that gold was dug, how it was melted and refined, as if he had seen it done 100 times, or as if the devil had taught him. Right? There's a queen, there's a female chief, right, who was being paid tribute in gold, right, out there in Florida, right, going crazy. Inasmuch that all who understood the manner of working in the mines averred that it was impossible for him to speak so exactly of it, without having seen the same. It would be foreign to our present subject to follow right, and check out this image first. Right, let's just take a minute. Right, this is the execution of the Indian cacique. You know, when they got the other tribes of Paroxy to shoot son in the chest with the arrows. That's a depiction of that. Right, crazy, right? Crazy, man. Crazy. Black people can never stick together. Never have been and never will be. Right, that's crazy. That's why we're trying to do what we're doing now. We're trying to unite. We're trying to bring people together. Right, it all counts. Right, what we doing? Where we at? What y'all on, man? What y'all on? Right, De Soto in this tour, and indeed the position of many. Oh, let's go back. We stop. It would be foreign to our present subject to follow De Soto in this tour, and indeed the position of many of the localities which are described by his historians, and the distances and directions of his wearisome and perilous journeyings must at the present day be matters of conjecture. It may not, however, be amiss to mention briefly the accounts preserved of the appearance of some of the tribes, though whose dominions he passed before his return to the northwestern districts of modern Florida. Right, so what are they saying? Run it back. Position of many localities which are described by his historians and distances and directions of his wearisomes and perilous journeyings must be at the present day be matters of conjecture. They're telling us that the historians lied. The historians lied. They didn't tell the truth. They didn't mention the accounts and the appearances of some of the tribes, those whose dominions he passed before them. They didn't mention how these people looked or what the situation was, right? They only talk about what they want to talk about. It's conjecture. What the historians are saying is conjecture. They miss out all the juicy stuff, but let's check it out, right? As he moved northward and marked change was perceived in the buildings, instead of the grass-covered huts, which several well enough in the general climate of the peninsula, the people of Tawali had for their roof little canes placed together like tile. They were very neat. Some had the walls made of poles, so artificially interwoven that they seemed to be built of stone and lime. They could be thoroughly warmed in the winter, which was there pretty severe. The dwellings of the caciques were roomy and commodious, and were rendered conspicuous by a balcony over the entrance. Great skill was shown by these people in the manufacture of cloth, grass, or fibrous bark, and the deer skins of which they made leggings and other articles were admirably well dressed and dyed. Right, check this out. We about to go into some drop. The most remarkable of the countries visited on this northern exploration was Cutifachicui, supposed to have been situated far up the Chattahoochee River. Right, this is the Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina area, which was governed by a female. They had a female queen. The Spaniards were astonished at the dignity and refinement of the queen. Her reception of De Soto reminds one of Cleopatra's first meeting with Mark Antony, as described by the great dramatist. Here they go, bringing it back to Egypt again. But not the Egypt that we come from, right? You know, true America. Not that Egypt. Right? Not the Egypt where he said the people was black like that of the Ethiopians. Oh, this queen was black like that of the Ethiopians? That's what you saying, big dog, right? Because you told me already that these people, you told me, right? In his accounts and his travels through Carolina and Florida, remember North and South Carolina is called Carolina, and Florida, these people are black like the Ethiopians. There's a queen right in these regions that he's talking about from De Soto's expedition. So we got a black queen. This is who I call Queen Kui. Queen Kui, because she was over there in Cutifachicui. That's Queen Kui. We're gonna do a short story on her, right? We're gonna dig up some stuff, right? She was brought down to the water in a pelican, and there seated in the stern of a canoe, upon cushions and carpets with a pavilion overhead. She brought presents of mantles and skins to the general, and hung a necklace of large pearls around his neck. The Indians of the country were represented as tawny, well-shaped, and more polite than any before seen in Florida. Again, in one he tells us they're black like that of the Ethiopians. And then in another, they make a reference to them being tawny. What is tawny? What is tawny? Just what is tawny? Let's see, right? Because remember, y'all can follow me on Instagram. There's shades of wheat. Let's give it up for the tawny complexion. That's a Negro woman. Right? Let's give it up for tawny. Shades of wheat. That's a melanated woman. Right? That queen was beautiful. Right? As a matter of fact, that's the complexion of a lot of our grandmothers and grandfathers, mothers, fathers, aunts, and uncles. Right? Tawny. Even ginger. So again, yes. They are talking about black people. Black people. De Soto out there in the southeast beefing with black people. Big dogs at that, right? Check this story out. Listen to what this queen did, right? The Indians of the country were represented as tawny. Their numbers had been greatly reduced 2 years previous by a pestilence, and many deserted dwellings were to be seen around the town. The accounts given of the quantity of pearls obtained here by searching the places of sepulture and incredibly. Departing from Cutifachicui, De Soto had ingratitude to carry the queen along with him, compelling her to even to go on foot, right? To try to to capture her. Like, yo, come with me. She's so beautiful. Just pull up with me. Come on, slide. You're going to be my wife, right? He was trying to get up on that, right? But she wasn't having that. In the meantime, that she might deserve a little consideration to be had for her still, she induced the Indians by whose houses the cavalcade passed to join the party and lend their aid in carrying the baggage. She succeeded finally in making her escape. She finally made her escape, right? Got away from De Soto, right? We must now dismiss De Soto and his band upon their long journey through the western wilderness. He died upon the Red River, and those of his companions who escaped death from exposure, disease, or savage weapons, years after events of the described, made their way down the Mississippi into the Gulf and thence reached the Spanish provinces of Mexico. Right? They went down into Mexico after that. Right? After stepping into Florida. Right? They went from the islands and then went down into Mexico in search of more gold. Right? So, like I said, man, the Americas, right? What existed on this land, right? Around this time, when all of these things was happening, a lot of this stuff was happening with black people, colored people, right? Who had a complete different religion. They didn't understand Christianity, Islam, or anything like that. They had a complete different religion, one that was more so connected to man's first true religion. Something that also connects the people back to the Maya. It connects the people back to the Maya. So yeah, it was colored folks out there, gang banging, holding it down, putting it on for their people. Giving these Spaniards pure hell. Right? In the next video, we're going to talk a little bit more about these expeditions. But we're also going to talk about the Seminoles. And this is why I mentioned Cal Tom, King Payne and them. Because how many of us actually knew they had this many chiefs, right? Micanopy, Tuskegee, Hajo, Emathalochi, Inchonamichito, Toski Mathala, known as Hicks, Charlie Amathala, Tuskegee, Cal Tom, John Blunt, Mulatto King, Philip, near Mathala, in addition to that, King Payne and Chief Osceola. Even Micanopy himself was a black man. The dark-skinned, dark-complected Seminole leaders that they said were mixed race or African. Right, we're going to learn more about the Trail of Tears and the fight that they put up to avoid that. Right, it wasn't just Andrew Jackson packing some folks up. It didn't go down like that. There's a lot they left out the history books that we can use as fuel to help us get past tough times now. We've been resilient. We've been them. We've been doing what we had to do to get through tough times, right? Most High don't play about his children. The Most High does not play about his kids. And that's a whole fact. He don't play about those that he love. And those who stay true and devoted to him. And that step away from all of that follower stuff, that worldly stuff. Man, we here to pay tribute. Pay tribute to those who dwelt on this land long before and who sacrificed their lives, their very livelihood to fight for what was right. Right? That's why we're learning about these people today. Prominent heroes in our history. Right? We're going to turn all of these into short stories, y'all. So make sure y'all check out the Amazon link in the description. If you haven't yet, make sure you purchase the Queen Khalifa Lost Legacy of Lamoria's short story. Is a really good short story for you and your children. We got the coloring books and much more to come, because it's stuff like this that we have to talk about. There was a queen in Florida, a black queen. We had 6 different chiefs in the Southeast Florida alone who put on. We're not going to talk about King Blue or Chief Tuscaloosa, Billy Bowlegs, and many others. We're not going to get into that. Right? This is Florida, just Florida alone, man. Pay tributes to them ancestors, man. All of this took part in DeSoto's expedition through Florida. And these are the people he's seen. People black like those of the Ethiopians, Tawny Queens, and stuff like that. I can't wait to read the next part of this book, man. I just need you guys to like, comment, and subscribe. Stay up to date on all content. Stay plugged in like an extension cord, because we going to be going crazy for the rest of the summer, man. If you learned something today, make sure you drop a comment. Love y'all. Peace.